Well, thanks for joining us for another conversation with Mayor Roger Reinert. I'm Greg Grell, and Mayor Reinert, recently you were out in Washington, D.C. You met with the Minnesota delegation. Talk a little bit about that, what that was all about.
Yeah, we make an annual trip in the spring. It works well with the congressional cycle, with our budget cycle, and also the state legislative cycle. We were really focused on a couple key things and all like classic infrastructure. Talking about, of course, the water treatment plant. The Lakewood water treatment plant happens to physically be in Duluth, but serves 4 communities: Proctor, Rice Lake, Hermantown, and the city of Duluth. I think folks know we have a consent decree or an order from the federal EPA to make about $50 million worth of improvements. And so any state and federal help we can get with that is just going to buy down the cost for residential and commercial users. We talked about the seawall improvements we're trying to make at Lot D. That's when you're looking at Pier B, that's the lot to the right. Great potential site for some residential, commercial, higher ed development, but we need to get that lot to stop eroding into the bay first before we do any work there. Thanked them for their help on the aerial lift bridge. We recently shared that the aerial lift bridge project, $23.3 million project, is fully funded at no cost to Duluth taxpayers. So that'll be a complete overview, inspection, and touch pointing on the structural, and then a complete redo of the deck, the lift part, which isn't original to the bridge, and the sidewalks. If you've been over the sidewalks, you know the sidewalks are tough. And so thank them for that. And then, a recent topic that has been on a lot of folks' mind is the holdup on funding with the Blotnick Bridge. And so met with the entire delegation, had some DOT conversations. We are hopeful about a thumbs up on that by the March 28th deadline. If we slide past that, then we miss a year of construction. It adds another like $80 million to the project just in delays. So everyone understood that that was important. And I think for Duluth, it's really important because we're rebuilding Superior Street through the heart of the Lincoln Park Business District. The Blotnick Bridge, of course, will have impact on the Lincoln Park Business District. So the last thing we want to do is spread that challenge out over more years than necessary. We want to try and time these two projects well to really minimize impact on the business district. But as with so many things in life, it's relationships. So it's always good to get an opportunity to go out and speak with the congressman and his staff, Senator Smith as she's getting ready to leave office. Senator Klobuchar, who I'm fortunate to have a great relationship with, and chat with her a little bit about what her aspirations might be in the governor's role should she be successful. But a good couple days out in D.C.
No, you mentioned the Lot D and the seawall failure or starting to erode into the harbor, but we haven't talked before on Conversation with the Mayor about all the great improvements behind the deck, and that's really looking good. And I think last summer was the first time we got to kind of enjoy it, but I think there's still a little tweaks left to do there.
So now, first of all, you owe me $1 because on my team, if you say behind the deck,
yes,
we put that in the swear. We put that in the swear jar because, for a reason, it really, I think the language reflects reality, right? And we, for so long, treated that space like an alley. And here it was like probably the most prime, preeminent waterfront in all of Duluth. And, we even literally built the original deck, auditorium, and deck arena with its back to the water in a way we would never do today. If you were to build that facility today, it would be all glass facing the water, with the lift bridge and everything right out the window. So we are, and we're going to, it's great timing because we're going to do a spring kind of grand opening of what we're calling the Waterfront Plaza. Because it does now function much more as a public gathering space instead of an alley. And you're right, we did sort of softly open that last year. It was used for the ship events that were back there. The Red Bull high dive competition was occurring in that space. But I'm excited. It's going to be a much better connector between Canal Park and Bayfront and points beyond. And it will be a space in and of itself for gathering both casually as people move through that space, as well as intentional activities. And, you'll recall I spent a year leading the deck during COVID, and, I was just constantly amazed at how many frankly dangerous interactions there were between tourists, pedestrians that were like, taking in the view and wow, look at and then cars that were just speeding through there because it was a straight stretch of road. So one of the things that I think the public will also notice is that stretch of road that goes through what is now the Waterfront Plaza will be seasonally closed to car traffic. So it really is about people, a space that's people first instead of automobiles. But I think it's exciting. The design is working well. There's power back there, so you can have music and gatherings, food trucks, things like that. And it's going to be a great public space that will enhance what the deck does, but also just be there available for the community and our visitors.
And just to add on to that, I happened to be driving by one day last summer when the Viking ship was down there.
Oh, yeah.
So I had to go down and see it, and it is very impressive when the big ships are docked. And
Right.
if folks haven't been down there, there's a new iconic Duluth sign down there. I love Duluth, where you can get
Yeah.
some great pictures with the lift bridge behind you.
Yeah, no, that was a Dan Hartman deck idea, and I have seen that thing like literally everywhere. So well done, Mr. Hartman.
Absolutely. Well, moving on, you've also met recently with mayors from around the state. And how valuable are those meetings? What do you learn when you do that?
Yeah, it is fantastic. And first of all, I just want to give a shout out to what I call our near neighbors, Mayor Warden Proctor, Mayor Hyman, Rice Lake, and Mayor Boucher in Hermantown. The four of us work so closely together. And that makes sense. When you put these four communities together, we're 55% of St. Louis County's population and roughly 60% of the county's tax base. So, when you go back in time, Hermantown didn't exist, Rice Lake didn't exist. Proctor's long been our neighbor, but the four communities have evolved together, and we just recently had what they call the State of the Cities. So
Right.
for Proctor, Rice Lake, and Hermantown, and I'm always proud and honored to attend that. And many of them will attend my State of the City coming up because we know, and I said it at that event, I hear all the time, I don't live in Duluth, but everything that happens in Duluth matters to folks that live, near to us. And I shared with them, and what you do impacts us as well. So many of the housing opportunities are currently not in our own community, they're in our neighboring communities, and that's helping meet regional workforce goals, and we function as a regional economy. The four mayors together have been talking about where there are shared opportunities like a regional park system or a regional library. We've even talked about are there opportunities for shared services like fire. Rice Lake has a almost brand new fire hall. We have one in Woodland that's not in great shape. Is there something there? I think, the fiscal realities that we all face right now are that we must look at ways that we can work better together, especially when we have 135,000 people that live within a 10-mile radius. And most of them don't care on what side of a boundary they happen to live. They see us as one entity. And the four mayors, while we have pride in our individual communities, also know that we need opportunities to work together. And then I think just to answer pointedly your question, leadership right now is hard. It's a really tough time to be in any role. Social media has made it really challenging. More and more behaviors that we're seeing, like in our public spaces, are making it challenging. So mayor can be a lonely job, and when you have a chance to be with other mayors and compare your stories and what challenges are you seeing and how are you responding to that, what opportunities have you seen, how does that fit for our community, you find out that the challenges, the opportunities, the roles have a lot of similarity, whether it's a community of 4,500, a community of 90,000, or a community of, 400,000 in the case of Minneapolis.
Now, speaking of the State of the Cities, the Hermantown Proctor Rice Lake event, any projects that Duluthians might be interested in that are happening in the region?
Yeah, I think a couple that have real regional significance, and I think highlight what we were just talking about, the new sports center development that's happening in Proctor. As soon as that news broke, I called Mayor Ward and congratulated him. None of us see good things happening in our neighboring communities as somehow a negative for our community. We have a regional need for athletic venues, and some of that might be in Duluth, some of it can be in Proctor, there's a new hockey arena in Hermantown. Again, the 4 communities function together to try and meet our regional needs. So that'll be exciting. It's great for Proctor as they build out their tax base. It's the single biggest project they've had in decades. So excited for Mayor Ward and Proctor. Again, Hermantown is really adding to their recreational base. Again, the North Star Ford Arena that opened recently is great for them, great for us. Rice Lake is installing utilities, including water and sewer, along the Rice Lake road corridor, and that road's getting improved in partnership with the county. I understand it'll be their first roundabouts in the city of Rice Lake, and there are always mixed opinions. I'm a fan, but it always takes a minute to get used to those. But that'll be an extension of growth for that community as well. And again, the 4 of us have to work together in order to meet things like housing and economy and job growth. Because those things just don't work within neat geopolitical borders. They work within hubs and within economic systems.
Well, speaking of those regional sports facilities, of course, a lot of tournaments, a lot of weekend events, and a lot of those people end up staying in hotels and motels in Duluth.
Yeah, Mayor Ward said it so well in his comments. He said, you do something in Proctor, they're going to stay in Duluth. They're going to eat in Duluth. They're going to extend their weekend, and they're going to end up, visiting things maybe in Hermantown. Or, we think that great things happening in our neighboring communities always benefits Duluth. We know that we have the tourism base. And likewise, and again, I'll applaud Mayor Ward because he articulated this so well. When the visitor economy in Duluth is going well, it has spillover effects. You think of this summer as Grandma's Marathon 50th anniversary, right? They sold out of every race almost overnight. We're going to have thousands, tens of thousands of visitors this summer. Like, they will be taking up every room within like a 100-mile radius. So, us doing well is good for our neighbors. Our neighbors doing well is good for Duluth.
Absolutely. Now, next week, we're recording this on March 13th. So next week, you're going to be heading, and your team will be heading down to the state capitol for Duluth and St. Louis County Days at the Capitol. Talk a little bit about some of the priorities that you're going to be stressing there to our lawmakers.
Sure. And you have probably more history on Duluth and St. Louis County Days than anyone from your previous work. This is one of the most impactful things that happens at the Capitol. And, for my almost a decade there, I can tell folks that when Duluth and St. Louis County Days happened, everyone knew. When I was a rep or a senator, they'd be like, hey, your people are here. Like, they just knew that Duluth was in the house. And, the expo at the end of the day is wildly popular and very, very well attended. It makes a difference when 500 plus folks show up and with a shared agenda that they're advocating for, in this case for Duluth, our near neighbors, and the rest of St. Louis County. This will be my 3rd opportunity to have a legislative agenda, and all 3 years it's been narrowly focused. I don't have a laundry list. I don't have, an expansive wish list, really focused on core infrastructure. We have been an administration that has really talked about effective and efficient core city services. So talking about the water plant, again, any state or federal dollar that we can get to help with that reduces what residents and commercial water users will have to pay. We're talking about those seawalls. If we can get that repaired, that's roughly $300 million of economic impact, tax-based growth within our community. We will be talking about the opportunity to do regional. In order to set up something like a regional library district or a regional park district, we need the legislature's opportunity to do that. So really narrowly focused. And then, of course, we also always support projects that are important in our community that might not be City of Duluth projects. So we'll be supporting some improvements at the Lake Superior Zoo. We'll be supporting the new tower at the Duluth International Airport, new hangars for our 148th team that does such a great job up there. But really focused on kind of core city service delivery and classic city infrastructure.
And how would you say your years as a legislator, both in the House and the Senate, how does that help, or does it help at all?
No, it definitely helps. And I think, it's interesting. I was listening to somebody on public radio this morning, and I reflected on how in a decade there's almost no one left in the house that I know anymore. It just turns over. People are always like, term limits. I'm like, don't worry, like that it turns over itself, especially from Greater Minnesota. But in the Senate, I still know a lot of folks and have personal relationships from the time that we spent working together. It was an honor when Senator Hoffman came back after his tragic shooting last summer, to be able to send him a personal note and just be like, so glad to hear that you're back and doing well, and also to be able to commiserate with others, with our loss of Speaker Hortman. Those relationships are still there and they're still great, and it's an opportunity to invest in those, and then an opportunity to make new ones where you have leaders that I didn't get a chance to serve with, but also incredibly helpful just to know how the process goes. Each year I know where we're at. I know what the posturing is, especially a year like this year when it's really about the bonding bill. We're not going to have any idea what this looks like until we're almost at the end game, because everybody holds that hostage for all the other things that they want to get out of a session. And, you always have members, and I was part of that, where we'd be off on, a little side group trying to hammer out a deal in order to get your regional projects or your city projects put in there. But knowing that process and how it usually plays out is definitely helpful. And we're fortunate to have a great team here at the city, and also working for us down at the Capitol, who also have a lot of experience. So I'm confident that we'll be able to have a successful session. And I'll just, come back, because this normally would have been a huge bonding win, the fully funding of the aerial lift bridge. Like, that's a big project that I don't want the community to lose sight of. And, in any year, if we were saying we got $23 million of state and federal money to take care of this project, like that would be the news of the session. So starting with that already off the table really positions us well to be successful with some other things.
Now you're in, I guess you're never out of this season. I'll call it how the sausage is made, but it's city budget.
It is.
You're working on that all the time, and you wanted to touch a little bit on the city budget, because last year was a difficult year. Yeah,
last year was a difficult year, and I think it's important to start that conversation now, because this year's going to be a difficult year as well. In fact, it'll be more challenging. We had a $7.3 million deficit that we were working on last year. We resolved that with really no impact to service delivery throughout the city. In fact, we were able to make investments in a couple places, including adding 3 new firefighters in order to try and reduce a pretty significant overtime budget and just wear and tear on our staff, who were constantly on call. This year, we're already facing another $5.5 million budget deficit, and as we look to 2028, another multi-million-dollar budget deficit. And I think it's important for the community to understand why. Expenses are growing at a roughly 5% annual rate, while revenue is growing at about 1.5%. And that gap is a structural budget deficit, and it is year over year. And so while we were able to do some things last year to help address that, like reinvesting dollars differently, addressing this ballooning overtime with the fire department, to resolve that budget deficit, again, with really no service impact delivery, those things are off the table now. I mean, we're really going to have to look at what we do and how we do it in this current budget cycle, in order to not only make the hard decisions we need to make for this year, but those will then help us with those trailing budget deficits as well. So, I know the community hears that and they will acknowledge that, and then we'll get to having to make some of those tough calls, and that's when it'll be important for the entire community to understand, we're prioritizing core city service delivery. We're prioritizing affordable property taxes, still the number one issue in the community. And, there's going to be tension there.
And the city will have, I should say citizens will have an opportunity to hear directly from you soon, because you've got your annual State of the City speech coming up. Right. Talk a little about what folks are going to hear in that speech. Yeah,
I'm really this year focusing, my internal working title is Math is Hard, because this is part of it, right? And it's not just this. I think what I'm hoping to do is help people understand what some of the underlying data is that drives things. I had a phone call this morning with a resident who was unhappy about potholes, because it's pothole season. We're in the spring, we're getting snow, it's melting, the water, our hills, our slope, and we have old streets. So, if we want to talk about what it takes in order to have better streets in Duluth, we need to understand the underlying data. some data points like 500 miles of streets that the city maintains. And that's not counting where you have more than 2 lanes. That's actually increases the number of miles that we maintain. It costs about $3 million to completely redo, including the subsurface, 1 mile of street. So you start putting that data together, and streets are really expensive. And it explains why we're only able to do about 15 miles a year, and that's from complete rebuild to just resurfacing. And that's just one part of the city budget. Most people don't know that police and fire are by far the single largest line items within the city budget. And yet most people are very, very supportive of our public safety team. So I'm going to spend a decent chunk of the state of the city just talking about some of the challenges that we're facing. We're having big conversations about public land and park spaces within the city of Duluth. And we need to understand that we currently have $118 million deferred maintenance within our park system. There's no levy big enough to resolve that gap. We're just going to have to start tackling these problems. And, I said to somebody the other day, for whatever time I'm here, we're going to be honest about these challenges. Like, I'm not interested in serving for another term or serving for a higher office or serving for something that comes after. I want to do this really hard work while I'm here and while I have the opportunity to do it. So we'll do some of that. We'll also do kind of the midterm report card. I ran on 5 big issues: housing at all income levels, growing our commercial tax base, focusing on streets and utilities, affordable property taxes, and revitalizing downtown. And I'm going to give what I think is an honest assessment of where we've made progress on those, where we still need to make progress, and highlight also some of the opportunities and challenges I see over the next 2 years. And and I think I'm working on an opportunity for some engagement with that. I want to try and mix it up a little bit. I come out of a teaching background, not a big stand at the podium public speaking background. So my team calls it Teacher Roger. I think we're going to try and really do a little bit more of that than just stand at a podium and talk at people.
And want to emphasize also, because people don't know, but this is a big public event. Anybody is welcome, right? Any citizen is welcome.
Yep, and we'll be been really intentional as mayor about going to our schools to do that. In response to the woman who called this morning, I don't run the schools. We have a superintendent of school board that does that. But there is, of course, a strong partnership, and we have a lot of pride in our schools. So the first State of the City was at Denfeld High School, East versus West. So the next one was at Ordine East. And this one will be at Lincoln Middle School, a beautiful school if folks haven't been there, and we'll be in the auditorium there on March 24th at 6 o'clock.
All right, I was just going to ask you for date and time, but
Yeah.
you did it. All right. While we're talking about infrastructure, you mentioned, the one, was it $3 million for 1 mile of road?
Yeah.
And you mentioned the infrastructure, because what people need to realize, as you said, an aging city, those pipes under the ground,
Right.
obviously have to be replaced as well. And one thing that there's a lot of concern about, and Duluth has been dealing with it over the years, is the lead pipes.
Sure, yeah.
Talk about where you're at with that right now, what's happening in the future.
Yeah, so we have roughly 7,000 lead pipe services within the city of Duluth. We've already replaced over 2,500 of those. We have several more neighborhoods on schedule to be replaced this summer. So we are actually ahead of our internal schedule for getting those 7,000 replaced over the next handful of years. Have to acknowledge that is been in large part to really great help from the state of Minnesota especially, but also some federal dollars to get after that. But, I think that the lead pipe service replacement is a great indicator of kind of what you started your question with, and that is just old infrastructure within the city of Duluth. We are a post-industrial Great Lakes city with a lot of infrastructure. We peaked in population at over 110,000. We actually built infrastructure expecting about 130,000. And, we've hovered at around 88, 89,000 for decades. Now we're starting to grow again, and that's good news. But we maintain a lot of infrastructure, especially for a city that is geographically large, 26 miles long by 8 miles wide. And I always say, just for comparison, Bloomington, Minnesota is roughly the same population we are. It's half the geography. It is a radial city versus us being a linear city. So in addition to streets, which are obvious when they need attention and repair, under the ground are also aging water and aging sewer lines. And those all, the data on those is big percentages of both of water and sewer are past what you would expect for their expected life expectancy. And so we have to be attentive to that as well. And we know when those systems fail. We had a water line collapse under Grand Avenue last year, took out 4 lanes of traffic. That was the original pipe laid down in the early 1900s. We had a sewer line fail, and that allowed raw sewage to go directly into Chester Creek. Both of those are indicators not of, some city staff person doing something wrong, of just old utilities that have to be replaced. So, I know that there's always a lot of interest in the big and the new and the fancy and the multi-million-dollar, whatever it might be. My job as mayor is to say to the community, like, we got to do the basics, and we got to do them really well. We have a fundamental responsibility around things like sewer and water and gas lines and streets and sidewalks.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things we wanted to talk about a little bit is, recently there's been a lot of negativity around city government, and it's kind of starting to spill out into the city council.
Yeah.
That's been, apparent in recent months. And I think a lot of people now are a little intimidated even to go to a city council meeting, to speak up at a council meeting. Talk a little bit about the situation there and what you'd like to see happen.
Well, and I acknowledge that the council chamber is sort of the council space, right? The 3 branches of government at the local level, we don't really have the judicial, but as mayor, I'm the executive and the council is our legislative. And it's one of the reasons I don't routinely go to council meetings. It's their space to have their opportunity to shine and their own deliberations. I routinely come when it's something that I think is really of community significance, and so things like the budget. But I did come a couple meetings ago to specifically help talk about this issue that we've seen on the rise. And I was at a gathering of, as you indicated, of mayors, and this isn't something that's unique to just Duluth. Across the country, you're seeing a lack of trust. You're seeing, frankly, just bad behavior modeled at other levels of government that then seems to indicate to folks in other communities, including our own, that that's okay within our public spaces. And it has made in our own council chambers. And I feel this really deeply, having served as city council president twice and having served in that space. We've seen behavior that has discouraged others from attending. And I say it's important that it be a space that everyone can come and speak to issues that are important to them, but also folks can come and just talk about their garage variance. I mean, there's just so much that is just routine city business that the city council has to be able to do on behalf of all the residents of our community, that it's important that small groups that have loud voices not be able to just take over that space and make it a space that isn't safe and welcoming to all. And I think it's also really important for us as a community, and this definitely comes from my background as a civics teacher, that we model tolerance and we model respect and we model safe spaces that are welcoming to all. And no matter what's going on at the state or federal level, I fundamentally believe that our big small town can be the place where we can demonstrate, we can have tough conversations, we can have differences of opinion, but we don't have to use profanity. We don't have to use insulting language to other speakers or to our counselors. We can do the respectful thing of addressing our comments to the council president, regardless of who they might be for. I mean, those are just rules of decorum that are common within our public bodies. And and I acknowledge, and I think other mayors would say the same thing, that we're just in this moment in time where things are just really challenging. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear. We went through this super tough chapter in Minnesota with the ICE and immigration activities, and that certainly had residual effect. But, Duluth is a big, small town. I always say we're not 1 degree of separation. We're like a quarter at best. And so, the antidote to this is not to withdraw from the public space. It's actually for many more to engage in that public space, both in our council chamber and in other public gatherings, because I know that this is not the behavior that the broad majority of the community wants to see. They want to see us tackle things in a way that we can be proud of.
And speaking about getting involved in city government, you have a lot of board and commission seats that are open. That's a great opportunity
It is.
for a citizen to get involved in government.
Yeah, and all of those are available on the city clerk's website. We have a lot of boards and commissions in Duluth. I think our current number is in the upper 30s. For a reference point, I think St. Cloud has 18 and Rochester has 12. We believe in boards and commissions in Duluth. The challenging part of that is that it adds up to almost 300 mayoral appointments, kind of like president and senate. I appoint, the city council confirms. Some of those are ones everybody wants to be on. Everybody wants to be on the planning commission. Everybody wants to be on, the deck board and things like that. Mm-hmm. But many of them struggle to maintain membership and struggle to have enough members to have a quorum so they can conduct their public business. So, and some of them are really specialized. Like, we have a building appeal board, and that must have like an architect, and it must have somebody who knows the construction business, and it has very specific requirements for membership on those boards, which the building appeal board has openings. But I do encourage, a lot of time I get folks saying, how can I help? Serve on a board or commission. I mean, these are great opportunities to provide input to the city council, to the mayor, to provide a service to your community, and things like the planning commission and the board of appeals. You can find all of them at the city clerk's website. It is a bit of a challenge to have them constantly updated with where the openings are at, but it's a great starting point. And if there's one that's of interest, strongly encourage people to apply. It takes maybe 5 minutes to fill out that application. I do take those importantly, and monthly we sit down and we look at openings and we look at applications to make recommendations to the city council, and then of course they consider those for appointment and approval. I will just note before we leave that March is a huge evolution. Something like a third of them all expire on March 31st. Oh. So it's a heavy lift. I think we have, I don't know, north of 30 that are going before the next council meeting for reappointment or appointment. So it's a great opportunity to take a look at those and see if there's one that's of interest.
Getting back to our conversation about, the amount of negativity that there has been, how do we attract people to our community to get investment in our community when the online chatter is so negative recently?
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind, this was really powerful to me. I had an opportunity to go to the Knight Foundation gathering about a month ago, or you'll recall, we're a Knight community because we had a Knight Ridder newspaper. The Duluth News Tribune was a Knight Ridder newspaper for many years. So they still consider Duluth to be a Knight community. And that was another great opportunity to gather with other mayors. The mayors of all of the Knight communities were there, and that went from on the small size Aberdeen, South Dakota, to on the large end, Miami-Dade County. And again, we were all seeing sort of the same things, and we talked about this. They were working in partnership with the Pew Research Foundation, who does just amazing work on civics and politics and media. About 10% of people post anything political online. Mm-hmm. So that 10% is super like it's like entertainment television online. It's just the thing that people are passionate about, and they're like, even in our community, we know who the players are. We watch them back and forth with each other, and I do mayor socials and I post and I'm done. Like you just like, here's your public forum to say whatever you want to say in response to that. But I just encourage people to remember that is not the majority of the community. It's not even it is not even the vast majority. 90% of people that are online are actually looking for good news and looking for encouragement, and they don't engage in that, and that's not the space that they comment. They want to know about activities and opportunities in the community. They want to hear about friends' birthdays, and they want to know about the great trip that you had and things like that. So I remind folks that that is not the majority of the community. It is definitely a small subset, but it's very loud. And I'm always amazed. I'm like, my gosh, how do you have so much time to be online? Like I can't keep up with, I'm always bummed when I see something that I missed. I'm like, actually would have loved to have gone that, but I just don't spend that much time online. So,
well, and speaking of more positive news, the new city administrator. That's a real success story for the city.
Yeah. No, folks will recall that, I began with Dave Montgomery, who came out of retirement for me to be the fourth mayor that he had an opportunity to work with. That is really, so I told him, one more, you'd be Clarence Matty. Clarence Matty served for 5. You get an award named after you, but his grandkids were more important to him, and rightly so. And we were fortunate to have Matt Staling, who served with us for a year after a long tenure with St. Cloud. Unfortunate for us, he answered a call to go back to the city of St. Cloud, where his family still was, and it just made sense for him in his personal life. And then I think really fantastic for us is Carla Colhane, a name many know. She is on her 29th year with the city of Duluth, was the manager of our information systems for many years. I knew her as a city counselor, then was the director to oversaw our clerk's office, IT, and human resources. So as she would say, not only needed to know what every single department in the city did, but how they did it in order to staff it with technology, staff it with people. So she is our new interim city administrator and is absolutely doing an amazing job. She is a classic systems thinker. And what I've loved so far in working with her, well, number one, she's just so positive, just has a great attitude, sees challenges as opportunities. We had a meeting the other day and we were talking about how some people are just wired to be really positive. Right. I'm not. I'm just not one of those people. I can get really, I have to be reminded. She is, and it's been a great balance between the two of us so far. And then also because she's a systems thinker, she sees she sees why something's an issue, and also has the organizational history to know how it kind of came to be an issue. And sometimes, there's people involved, and she'll be like, oh yeah, that's because those two worked together 10 years ago and didn't like working together, and this one thought they did the other one's work. And it's just that level of history with the organization has just been amazing so far. So, we as a leadership team, after a couple of years of forming that team, are really starting to row in the same direction. We had a great leadership retreat at the end of January where we talked about the 5 big issues and what are the strategies and how are we going to know what are the metrics and who owns it as leaders within our team so we can have accountability. And then we, in the afternoon, had author Chuck Marone come and talk to us. He wrote the Strong Towns book, and that was really impactful. So now with Carla leading that team and the team that we've built, I'm super enthusiastic, even with the challenges that we have, budget and aging infrastructure. Those also present great opportunities for us, and excited about where we're going in 2026 and 2027.
Well, as always, there's a lot going on in the mayor's office, a lot going on with the city of Duluth. We'll do this again in a few months, another conversation with Duluth Mayor Roger Reiner. Thank you, Roger. Good talking with you again.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.